We're at the finish line. You're voting tomorrow, right?
The Dan Yorke State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
No speeches for me. You vote as you want to. I mean, historically, I kind of, waved my finger and suggested if you don't know what you're doing, don't vote. But you know what? All the rules have been broken this year, so I'm guessing that there are many more, well, there are probably less uninformed people in a race where we have so much discontent. Because the only way that you can be discontented is to know a little bit about it. I'll try that theory on my political scientists here tonight, and with no further ado, we're going to skip the rundown and get to what is at least the latest news in the presidential race. The headline, did I welcome you in, by the way? Nice to have you in on a Monday night. This guy is just trying to survive at this point, it seems to me. A Sunday night, oh yeah, by the way, everything we're taking a look at doesn't seem like it would add to any difference in conclusion, though we gave Congress a little while back in the fall to say that there's no charge coming to Hillary Clinton. Some would say that the trouble was made for Hillary and that what he had to say last night has rather no significance. We'll talk about that again with our guests coming up momentarily. In the meantime, here's the latest at press time.
Donald Trump capped a 5-state campaign push in Virginia overnight, railing against the FBI's decision to exonerate Hillary Clinton over her email controversy.
This is a rigged system. Hillary Clinton is guilty. She knows it. The FBI knows it.
After reviewing thousands of newly discovered Clinton emails, FBI Director James Comey penned another letter to Congress Sunday, revealing investigators are standing by their July decision not to bring charges against the Democratic nominee.
We're glad that this matter is resolved.
Clinton did not mention the FBI development as she rallied support in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and New Hampshire with the help of LeBron James and James Taylor.
I really believe that America's best years are still ahead of us.
Clinton's email saga has haunted her throughout the entire campaign. Despite the FBI's final decision, the issue continues to be a source of debate on Capitol Hill. In a statement Sunday night, House Speaker Paul Ryan used the topic to encourage Americans to vote for Trump, saying Clinton simply believes she's above the law and always plays by her own rules. Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid once again accused Director Comey of breaking the law for penning his original letter to Congress, writing, Director Comey created a political firestorm 11 days before a presidential election merely to confirm what we already knew, that Secretary Clinton's email practices were legal. Voters will get their final say tomorrow.
Our respective political scientists from URI and PC, Shanna, Pearson, Merkowitz, sorry about that, and Joe Cammarano. Your name's easier. You don't have a hyphen. But no strangers to the program. What do you make of that?
The Comey stuff is really interesting from a perspective of public administration. I think Comey was set up by FBI rogues and the committee, the Intelligence Committee in Congress, and he was boxed in a corner, and now he's out of that corner. Everybody hates him, but he probably did the best he could.
It's hard to say exactly what was going through the mind of the director. I think he was in a bad position where he felt like if there was something in those emails and a day after the election he comes out and says it, no one's going to be his friend, and if he breaks what are stated rules with the FBI and weighs in that they're looking at new emails, nobody's going to be his friend. So I mean, I think he was in a tough place no matter what. It's impossible to say what he should have done in that scenario.
I'd argue that because both sides despise him, this year he's probably doing the right thing.
Yeah, I don't know. His presentation to Congress, his press conference, his presentation to Congress originally was unprecedented in and of itself. And that once he got that ball rolling, where it was going to end up bouncing was to be determined. But he didn't. Anybody who thought that was the last word from him made a mistake.
Well, and that's something he should have never promised that he was going to update them. I mean, that was one of the things that I think a lot of people now are saying, like, why do you say that when you know the rules are that you're not supposed to talk leading up to an election about the people who are in the election?
Right.
And I think that was one of his fatal flaws, was just making that promise.
Right. But he was asked specifically in September if he found new information, would he reopen? And he didn't say he'd reopen, but he said he would, of course, look at the information. They said, promise you'll keep us updated. And he said yes. And so I think what happened was, this is why I think there's more to be understood. He was probably set up by somebody who knew that this information was going to come out, and they waited long enough to make it have maximum impact, and he knew it was going to come out and he had to do something. And I actually think he did the right thing the second time. Not the first time.
So what are we doing? What are we talking about? First, second, and third? Like
back in July,
so like last night was the third time.
Yeah, last night was the third time.
It seems to me on the second time, what would have been appropriate is to add some kind of a thought in the original letter of 10 days ago and say, as of now, status is nothing that we see here right now so far indicates a change in our position. Instead.
Well,
but I'm not so sure what he knew and what they had, and whether they blew through 600,000 emails, and through some automated system, or who knows. But now we're hearing that there's duplication, there's all that kind of thing, which is what we had thought probably could.
But go back and read that first of the two letters now that are bookended, and it was about, look, I told you that if information came in, well, on an unrelated case, information came in, so I'm now telling you. That's all he said. And they were like, well, why is he so vague? And that's where I began to pick up that this guy was in the corner, because that information was going to be leaked anyway out of the New York office. And so he figured he had to do something. And now he said, gee, it is all duplicate and personal email, essentially. But he's now, of course, towing that very, very careful line by not addressing specifics.
Well, the Democratic candidate's not even talking about it. I guess because in some ways, and this is where your expertise really comes into play here, it may not have moved the needle long term. It seemed to have moved the needle short term, and now we're talking about 6 and 7 day increments, and maybe even 2 and 3 day increments after the second communication or the first letter, you're following, came out. I mean, the blank was hitting the fan all over Kingdom Come, right? But now it seems that the polls have been scoshing back, and they have no relationship to Comey's communication last night because it's too close.
Well, and also, I mean, what benefit does it possibly serve her to address any criticisms right now? Like, she's in the final stretch. Her job was to make her closing arguments to the American people about why she should be president. That's her job in these last few days. If she addresses them, then she has the potential of finding a bunch of voters who weren't following it, and now they know, right? They had missed that the FBI director had come out and said this, and that, that they were looking at new emails, and now she's just informed them. Best thing for her to do is focus on getting out the people who support her and making her case to the number of people who are on the fence about if they're casting a third-party ballot, if they're casting a vote for her. I think that, she's not getting any Trump supporters.
That is so too. Donald Trump, does he just ignore this latest FBI thing and just keep talking about it being rigged? And he was giving the FBI a little bit of a, hey, maybe they're not so rigged analysis. And now, what does he do in the last 24
Two things
hours?
about Trump. One is he's been more disciplined in the past 2 weeks than he had been the whole time. He's acting more like a candidate, reading prepared scripts, staying on it. I think this is indeed a distraction for him, because he falls into the trap that we all fall into in the moment, and thinking that this is going to be a major game changer. And all the research suggests that there's very little support for
this
that.
Meaning a reopened look by the FBI.
Any of these short-term things, whether it's the FBI issue, whether it's even his problems that he had with specific things like attacking the cops.
Well, the polls were closing, though, pretty significantly. I mean, the ABC poll, ABC Washington Post went from 12-13 to 1.
But this is, political science
and now
at
it's
its
back.
best. This is, right, look at June. The polls are identical today to as they were in June, which really just calls into the question, do these campaigns matter at all? We could have held the presidential election the day after.
You told us that in June, by the way. Mm-hmm. I remember you said. I remember you specifically said, more or less, that this whole thing. You may have said it too, Joe, but I remember. I just have this vision of you telling me. We could go back to the archives and find you saying, pre-convention, this whole thing is wrapped up anyway.
Right. Well, basically, as soon as you know who the nominees are, you could hold the election, and generally that the polls on that right after the conventions will hold until election day, and you'll see mad fluctuations during the campaign. And there are lots of different theories about why you see that, but right before we actually hold the election, they settle right back to where they were the day after the conventions.
Absolutely right, and it would probably be better for everybody if we took the two nominees and made them go somewhere where there was no communication with them and just let the election happen. The campaign could be done by surrogates. It's same outcome. Actually, you're right. Once you know the nominee, you can know which candidate's going to win, but you actually can tell which party candidate is going to win even before the nominating phase, usually.
All right, this is worth digging into. We'll come right back and try to explain why. Stay with us.
They say we'll get a tremendous amount of credit, win or lose. I said, no, 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 no. I don't want any credit if we lose. I'm not looking for credit. I'm not looking for credit. I'm looking to make America great again, not credit.
Well, I don't know if that looks like he's resigned to an outcome. I don't know if we're going to get a November surprise here tomorrow. Even the 538 poll that had kind of a 90+% chance for Hillary Clinton is down to 67.4. But a 2 out of 3 chance is a pretty significant chance for winning, correct? Yeah. So going back to this thesis that you had 6 months ago or 5 months ago, which is, hey, you know what? I don't want to use the cliche over and over again, but the cake is more or less baked here. Da 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 da. Why is that? Why is that? Is it that party politics are still a significant? It seems to me that Americans are upset with the status quo, upset with corporate party politics, yet.
Well, the vast majority of people won't break from their party. So, there's about 85% of this country who is going to vote the exact same party in every single election, no matter what's happening.
And no matter what they say.
Right.
They're going to do it. Frequently people think that they are independent when it comes to presidential elections, and they're not.
Well, what about here in Rhode Island? The largest voting bloc we have are unaffiliated voters.
But that's because of our system. So our system encourages people to register as independent, because you can still vote in the primary and just switch parties the day of, right? We have a lot of things in this state that... Because
of our open primary system.
Our open primary system.
If we had a closed primary system, you think that there'd be much more of a choose one affiliation.
Yes, but you also have a situation in Rhode Island that we have, we have basically a one-party state. And there's a whole lot of people who feel, I'm not so content with that, but look at the national parties. I'm not a Republican. I may feel uncomfortable with the Democrats in Rhode Island. We're a one-party state. There's a lot of, we've had tons of corruption scandals. They're not so happy with that, but they always vote Democrat, right? They always vote the same way. And that's what we generally see is there's what we call political leaners. And you have the hardcore, the strong Democrats, strong Republicans who identify with that party. And then you have a lot of people in this country and in Rhode Island who identify as independent. I don't like the two-party system, but they'll never break from the party they always vote for.
And part of it's cultural, not just in Rhode Island, but in the country as a whole. We pride ourselves on being very libertarian in our sensibilities. We like to be independent thinkers. Rhode Island, of course, the independent man is at the top of the Capitol. And so this identity of independence is something we hold dear. And so our consciousness is often independent, but our actual behavior isn't. So we say we're independents, we really think it, but we're really not.
Also, I think the polarization of the two parties feeds into this because, the middle ground has gotten further, there is no middle ground these days. The polarization of the candidates are so far away that if you're someone who, maybe you're a moderate Republican, making the leap to a Democrat's a pretty big leap. And same thing with a moderate Democrat, making the leap to voting Republican. That's a big ideological leap these days, right? When you have two candidates who relatively similar are playing to a moderate base, you might get more people splitting their tickets, switching sides on the presidency. But when we have this polarized system where on every issue, the Democrats are over here and Republicans are over here, being that swing voter, a true swing voter who's moving between the two means you're not following politics.
And what of those who say that whether they're left or right, and it's polarized or not, that actually the game of party politics, the two major parties, is all just one big entity, that it's one big entity to not trust and to resent?
Well, I guess I've said it before, but sometimes what people think and what's reality are different things. I don't think that that's true. If you look at the two parties, there is a clear
difference. They think that it's not true that they think
they're not the same. They're not the same. Yes, if you are far on the right and far on the left, there's not much difference between the two. But America is an amazingly moderate country, that the vast majority of voters are somewhere in the middle, maybe a little left, a little right. And, those are the people for whom the parties matter. And, the extremists can say, oh, yeah, there's no difference between the two. That's nonsense. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And I could take an hour and tell people why they're dumb if they think that.
Reagan Democrat, right? Reagan Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Trump didn't get any.
Well, the Reagan Democrats are mostly in the cemeteries, and so if he does get them, then there is real voter fraud.
Meaning there aren't any anymore?
Yeah, most Reagan Democrats were older union, white, ethnic. They were Democrats
so maybe they are
for
there,
economic
but they're
reasons.
no longer Democrats.
I'll tell you where.
I think that's
yeah.
the big thing.
Yeah.
Is the Reagan Democrats were Democrats because we were going through a party realignment. What it meant to be a Democrat versus a Republican, take the 1960s, right? The Republican Party was the liberal party going into the 1960s. The Democratic Party was the conservative party going into the 1960s. By 1980, they're flip-flopping. People haven't totally switched their party identification, right? And so we do see these people who are like, I think maybe I'm independent, I vote for the opposite party, because the party that they identified with in their early 20s no longer represents them at all, right? And that's the transition that happened after the Civil Rights Act, right? The Democratic Party and the Republican Party literally just switched places.
And it's a place like an old-fashioned, we've talked about this so many times, an old-fashioned Irish Catholic Democratic family I was born into. Although my father never told me what his affiliation was. And my mother certainly did. I mean, she was a Kennedy Democrat all the way through. When she got a letter from Senator John Kerry directly asking my mother what was wrong with my son, laughing. When she got that letter from John Kerry, literally saying, I like your son, but he's off. That was the biggest moment in the world for her, and it continued our debates on issues as I was moving away from the Democratic Party that she knew and was moving away from her, and she didn't know it. Right? I mean, so that's...
Right, and I think it's important to remember, evangelical Christians used to be evenly split between the Democratic and Republican Party. As of the 1980s, they were evenly split. And then quickly, right, with the Gingrich Revolution, you quickly see Republicans moving as evangelical Christians moving as a block towards the Republican Party. But in 1980, they're evenly split, right? You're coming out of Carter, and there's a large support among evangelical Christians for the Democrats. Can you even imagine that today? Right, so I think it's important. I think exactly what you're saying is those Reagan Democrats that we remember are either dead or they're Republicans.
I'll tell you though, there is a surge.
I'm sure it's a good thought. We'll talk about the surge, and we'll look at some polling data on this election eve. This conversation is broad enough, though, that you may see this on a repeat, because no matter how this election turned out, these concepts hold true. Stay with us.
This election is a moment of reckoning. It is a choice between division or unity, between strong, steady leadership or a loose cannon.
What is the surge?
I think there is a surge in support for Trump this year of non-college educated, particularly men, and I think it's very strong. They're the single largest voting bloc if you sort of group them that way, because again, 1 out of 3 Americans get a college degree. And they clearly are not going to vote for Hillary at levels, although the women are still, it's a toss-up. What happens after this year, I don't know.
Allegedly, the white suburban woman, though, is absolutely offended at Donald Trump's behavior, according to the polling data, and she needs them like air.
But
right
I would
now.
say, one thing that's important here is that you're talking about non-college educated white men, right? And a similar surge has happened for the Democratic Party of Latinos. And many of whom do not have college degrees, and so we're talking 1 in 3 people has a college degree. we're also talking about a large minority base that is shifting drastically in this election.
So the Latinos are surging, and the African American population not coming out in the same percentages in places like North Carolina and Florida like they did for Barack Obama. It's probably an unfair bar to put up, given that he was the first.
Well, it's also
black
the voting
American
rules changed in North Carolina in ways that hurt African Americans. So in the last election, both of Barack Obama's elections, you had Sunday voting. And the African American church was amazing at, saying, look, at the end of the service, go vote. Everybody has the day off work. We'll just walk across the street and go vote. And the North Carolina legislature stopped that. And so, I mean, there's actually now a harder bar for African Americans to overcome in order to vote, because the hours are not there on the day they voted for the last 2 times.
Interesting. Let's take a look at some data. The 538 poll, or the 538 calculation, is on the Electoral College, and it has Hillary at 67% likely. And some states are swinging back Donald Trump's way. And then the Real Clear Politics poll, out of 10 polls here, she leads in 8 of them. The IBD TIP tracking poll and the LA Times USA tracking poll have Donald Trump up 2 and 5 respectively. But they've got some extraordinary methodologies in those polls, correct?
They do. Their weighting system was designed well enough, but when it was implemented, it kind of exaggerates the voice of one person in that panel sample. And so the problem is that one person gets weighted so heavily.
Why are they consistently outliers here? But if they end up being correct,
right. Let me be direct.
They'll bust the entire polling industry skywide, right?
What happened was they have a sample and they weight them to match the population as a whole. And there's an African American in that sample who is voting for Trump. And so instead of being sort of one person out of a sample of however many hundred, they weight that, I think, by a factor of 7 or 8. And so that one person is just pulling the Trump support pretty far in that direction in a way that probably is not accurate given the other polls.
This time tomorrow night, under no circumstances do you see Donald Trump winning this race, or do you?
I think it's certainly possible. I mean, I've said this on this show before, that it's all about turnout. And, the polls don't tell us anything.
He's got no ground game, she does.
Yes. But if she has a great ground game, and that's really, it seems to be showing in the early voting. However, what happens on election day is a very different scenario. You have people who have to go to work. They have to pick up kids. And, depending on what happens in those states that makes those things more difficult, in those key battleground states.
All right, so if he wins, you will be what? Shocked, surprised, I told you so, da-da-da, could have been, you'd be shocked.
I'd be pretty shocked. It is possible. I think that everything is close enough. I will be shocked. To be honest, as a presidential scholar, I will be appalled at the collective judgment of the American people. Yet I will also accept it, and I don't think the country is going to die, even if Donald Trump gets elected.
I got a few seconds. Will you feel the same way?
I will feel very similarly. No matter who is elected, though, what I will be feeling is a great hope that people can put the election behind them and say, you know what, we have lots of other ways to influence the system, and if we're unhappy with the election result, we will use those other ways to influence the system.
Right.
Peacefully.
Peacefully, that's right.
We'll get them together after the election. Be right back. Yeah, of course, it's your American right to vote tomorrow. Good luck. I'm still thinking. We're going to have a repeat. Actually, we'll be off tomorrow. We'll be back live on Wednesday. See you.